Hey, Phoenix, who are you?
Well, I don't mind unidentified participants in the call as long as they don't interrupt or are rude in any way.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't mind either. Just wanted to see if they might introduce themselves. They might be interesting people.
Yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice, but no obligations.
It's true. It's true. I want to make myself a cup of coffee. Does somebody else want to go first while I'm doing that?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm happy to go first, I guess. Last week we were at the IC3 Ethereum bootcamp, and we came up with a couple of new sharding solutions. I guess, like, more generally, I'd say somehow a new kind of sharded block structure and 3 fork choice rules, one of which closely resembles an older fork choice rule that we had for our sharding with merge blocks. The main difference between the merge block sharding and this newer sharding solution is that we have message queues as opposed to merge blocks for communication or synchronization across shards. And it's not really message queues as much as like message sent and received logs. The sent queue, a sent log kind of acts a little bit like a queue indirectly, but they're not really queues. It's just sent message logs and received message logs. And so we worked a lot on that last week, and now we're working on the paper again. Nate found a bug in the Clique Oracle, which he mentioned last week, which I think we've almost put to rest and refactored everything to compensate. But maybe you want to mention that, Nate.
Sure.
Or maybe this is going in depth a little bit fast. But I guess that is the end of the update that I have, so I think that's fine.
Cool. Yeah. So I can talk about the Clique condition because I actually think it's a different one from last week. There was two kind of. The first one that led us to introduce this weight thing, which is what I think we were talking about last week, and now that turns out to not be enough.
Okay, so why don't you describe both? Because I forgot about the one last week.
So essentially, our clique condition to originally, when we first kind of started, was essentially the fact that all the validators in the clique see each other agreeing, and there are no later disagreeing messages that they could see from each other that are floating around, essentially, that haven't been delivered yet. And it turns out that this actually isn't. And then once we had a clique, we would kind of insist that if there was a clique of a certain size called a threshold, then essentially we would have kind of safety on this clique existing. But it turns out that if this is all we insist on, then we can pretty much have a clique of threshold size that ends up being smaller than it needs to be in one of the validators in the clique state. And the idea here essentially is that if validators equivocate, the size of the threshold for the clique goes down. Essentially, we need less people to be in a clique for us to kind of claim we have safety. But the thing is that just because people equivocate in our current state doesn't mean the validators in the clique actually see that equivocation. So this was the kind of the thing that we talked about last week. And the solution was essentially to, when checking for a clique, check in the validators' kind of views themselves and their own justifications to see if they had a clique of if the clique was the appropriate size in their kind of views as well.
Well, specifically, we said that it should be a majority.
Yeah. So we were essentially arguing that, okay, the fix to this problem is just arguing that the clique is the majority in their views. And we thought that this was going to let us avoid this problem. Well, it turns out that it kind of helps with some proofs, but it makes one proof harder and seemingly impossible. And pretty much the problem was, what happens when a validator now who's in the clique equivocates? It might not be true that kind of the clique is a majority anymore, for the reason of, it was a majority, someone left, how are we going to argue it's a majority now? So to summarize the first thing, we were missing a condition. We were missing something in our clique definition that essentially made it so cliques could be really small and not be majorities in the
yeah, exactly. Well, still being majorities in everyone's views.
Yeah,
not just the state.
Yeah, but that condition turns out wasn't enough, or somehow maybe it is enough, but it didn't work well with the proof, and so we had to change it. So we had some conversations yesterday, I guess it was, about kind of how to address this. Vlad had some thoughts. I'm not sure what ended up happening over the past 12 hours, but
I mean, a good amount of it did. So basically, the suggested change is to remove the weight condition from the oracle and to add a condition that it's agreeing, and then so that the oracle definition is just that they all agree, that they see each other agree, and that they can't later see each other disagree. And then to reason about the size of the oracle separately, and to give basically the there's like a first part of the safety oracle proof where we reason about the fact that minimal transitions either don't break the clique or leave a smaller clique behind, in the case that they're equivocation, for majority cliques, and for most of that proof we don't need to use the majority clique property. And then with the safety with the clique oracle, they not only need to be a majority, but they need to be like such a big size that like if there are up to T equivocations, it'll still be a majority. And so the idea is to like separate out the reasoning about the weights from the reasoning about the agreeing and later disagreeing properties of the clique. And I think that at the end of the day, we're going to need the threshold weight condition, which is this total sum of the weighted validators plus T divided by 2 minus the equivocating weight. That's the clique size. I think is going to have to hold for this protocol state that we're evaluating the safety oracle in, and for each of the latest messages of the validators in that protocol state.
That threshold is going to have to hold. And so we're no longer talking about sigma, but talking about justification of latest honest message.
It's going to hold both for sigma and the justifications of latest honest messages.
Yeah, that seems like it is definitely enough.
I haven't worked through all the proofs yet, but in the new messages from validators in the clique part, I was able to show. I used actually both of the conditions. I used both of the majority conditions. I don't think that the proof would have been possible without both of them. Although I haven't found a counterexample yet, or although I suspect more and more that they do exist. So that's exciting. So I haven't worked through all the proofs yet, and I think that like the complexity now is going to be moving to the threshold size stuff, which is like in a kind of later section that I haven't gotten to yet. So I've been kind of looking ahead just to convince myself that it's going to work. But the fact that I had to use both majority conditions in the new message from the cliques and the validators, don't break the clique if they're not equivocating kind of proof, was super interesting.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think interestingly, that's like kind of the exact same. I mean, that's that the fact that you needed to use that was like the opposite of that fact is the reason that I think we kind of came up with the counterexample originally. So the first time we introduced this kind of weight condition, the majority honest weight condition, it was because of that exact thing, pretty much. Because it wasn't just enough to insist that it was a majority at sigma. We also needed to talk about kind of what they saw in the justification of their latest honest messages. So
yeah, totally. Because we were looking at these cases where we had really small clique sizes.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They just they weren't majorities for these validators who hadn't seen the equivocations.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah, I guess so. So, by the way, for Kent and Michael, who are, implementation now, previously, or soon, I guess the kind of summary is that the clique oracle might change a bit, but if it does change, it has to do with a kind of extra weight condition check, I guess I'll say. To be honest, I'm a bit worried about how it changes like the complexity of the clique oracle. But I guess it's understudied, and
So I guess there's one part of the algorithm where we find this like graph of who sees each other agree and can't see each other later disagree, and then we look for a sub clique, and now that clique not only needs to be a certain size, but needs to be a certain size for every validator inside that clique. And so what can totally happen is, you find a clique, and then there's a validator inside the clique for which that clique is not a clique because they haven't seen the equivocations yet, or it doesn't meet the threshold size. And then like this clique, which normally would have been okay, now is not, and we have to like continue looking for smaller cliques. And the concern there is that we'll have to look at on the order of the number of subsets of the number of nodes
and pretty much
satisfy the clique condition.
Pretty much the like intuition there as to why we might have to do that is because it seems like something greedy isn't going to work. Because imagine there's some validator who doesn't satisfy the clique condition. Maybe this is not true. Well, anyways, I guess I'll give you the thought. I haven't thought through it at all, but the intuition was, imagine there's some validator who doesn't satisfy the kind of clique condition, the weight condition in their own view. It's unclear whether you should remove them from the clique or you should remove someone else from the clique that would then make it true. But I actually don't think that's the case, so it might not be so bad. Anyways, I guess when it actually comes to implementation, it'd be cool to look into more.
Yeah, maybe it's natural to remove validators who have seen the least equivocations and therefore have the largest clique size that they require.
Yeah. Yo, that seems reasonable.
And another idea is like, we just okay. I was thinking it's not really great, but just wait until all the validators see all the equivocations and then only run the safety oracle in the setting where they all have the same equivocating set. That's probably the easiest thing to do.
So I didn't quite catch what the weight check was once you find a clique for each validator.
So you know how the clique needs to be of a particular size?
Well, yeah, like more than a majority, at least.
No, it needs to be like a super majority, right?
You mean for
like
previously?
No, even like just like in theory, for it to be a safety oracle, it needs to be a majority after equivocations, and so it needs to be a super majority. Yeah. If there's at least if there's any equivocation budget left.
Yep.
So, and so so it needs to be a super majority, but that means in the protocol state. And it didn't necessarily mean that it was a super majority in each of their latest messages. And if it's not a super majority, if it's not even a majority in the latest message, then it might be possible for them to make a new latest message that disagrees, even though no one in the clique has a new message that disagrees, just by using people outside the clique, because, if the clique's not a majority, that could be possible. So the condition is basically that weight threshold is satisfied not just by the clique, but by the clique from the point of view of each of the validators.
Oh, I see. So initially I thought this had to do with validator rotation, but I guess not. This is...
No, it doesn't. No.
Yeah, irrelevant of that. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, it has to do with equivocations and the fact that people might see different validators equivocate, or maybe some people might not see validators equivocate at all.
So if you do this check sort of later, it would seem like, eventually each validator will have or like a super majority clique from their perspective, and then it'll
Well,
get cheaper, right?
Assuming that none of them are Byzantine and that we have a synchrony assumption, then absolutely. But in asynchrony or if there are Byzantine validators in the clique, that seems like a more tenuous proposition.
Well, I was just saying, like, well, you can still have this relaxed version where you don't have to go through this, like, oh, should I take this validator out or that validator out instead, and just like wait it out until most of the validators
Totally.
catch up.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting, and
I
think
see.
it's.
Okay, sorry, I didn't catch that.
Although by catch up, I was specifically saying, they should have all exactly the same equivocator set. And if they all do, then our safety oracle as we have it now works.
I see. Cool.
So I guess that's the updates from our side, unless you want to hear more about sharding, which I guess we didn't talk about it too much last week, did we? I don't really.
Too much about what?
Certainly, we didn't talk about it in too much detail. Our new sharding solution.
Oh no, you did it.
Okay,
Like,
well,
I could show just the kind of block structure
Oh,
real
that'd
quick
be
if you want.
Sure.
oh yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, do a screen share.
Yeah, 1 sec. Sorry.
Actually, before that, what is the issue with the merge blocks? That did you throw that sharding solution away, or is it just you're just searching for more alternatives?
Merge blocks do have issues satisfying weaker atomicity conditions. Because if a merge block is going to eventually be included, that means that entire blockchain can't make any progress past that merge block without including it now. So there's like a kind of, it really forces you to include things right away, because it bundles the sends and the receives into a single block. Whereas with the queues, we get to have like delayed receives, which in a way that isn't possible naturally with merge blocks. So I guess delayed receives without either of the chains stopping or slowing down, or being kind of conditionally blocked on including a block.
Interesting. But since you're still conditionally blocked, doesn't it mean that?
Well, you're not. You're kind of only be conditionally blocked like before some timeout. And so as long as your chain is like before that timeout, then you're kind of cool to continue operations freely and at your own convenience include those received messages.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so every message has this kind of blocks to live number. By which it has to be included by the other shard. And like, well, it would be invalid for it to be included later by that other shard. And if that block, if it's not received by the other shard, then the sending shard either needs to orphan the send in order to guarantee atomicity, or the blocks that don't receive that message on the receiving shard need to be orphaned, so that all the blocks after that height do receive that message.
Okay.
So Nate, you wanna go over this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build kind of our sharded block structure. So the first thing is that we're going to start with a kind of, I'm not going to go through all the preliminary things for fear of taking it too long, but essentially assume we have some set S of shards or shard IDs. And we're essentially going to kind of go from Genesis and build up a whole bunch of blocks and a whole bunch of blockchains. So first of all, we start with a Genesis blocks on every single shard. And the blocks at the next height, which by the way is not the same thing as like the, kind of blockchain height. It's just like the height in the recursive definition. Okay, so here's what we have. Essentially, I'm going to run through each of them and kind of read them off as what they are. So a block is made up of a couple of things. The first thing it has, as usual, is a prev block. Very notably, this prev block has to be on the same shard as your block. So essentially each block is only on one shard is the point there. It also has some arbitrary block data. This might be, the Coinbase of the block. It might be, the transactions in the block, et cetera, et cetera. The non-cross shard transactions notably, but this is just kind of arbitrary block data. So far we have a prev block, arbitrary block data, and here's where we kind of get to our interesting things as they relate to sharding definitions. So this first thing we're going to call sent logs, I guess, or sent queues. And pretty much this is a map from shard IDs, so S, to lists of this entire kind of type thing here is cross shard messages. Okay, so for each shard, we're going to have a list of essentially outgoing cross shard messages, where Q is the actual message payload. B is this thing that Vlad mentioned that was called B is what we call a source block, target block. Target. That's hilarious. And then this last thing is the time to live. So let's spend a second here. So essentially what this says is that for every shard, we have a list of outgoing transactions where each of them has a payload, this target. And the thing to know about the target is that if this payload is going to be included in the chain, it essentially has to be included after the target. So if there's some fork going along and some cross shard message on another shard picks that as the target, then it can only be included if it's later than that target and on that same chain. So it can't be included in a fork that doesn't have kind of this block in its history. And then the second thing is this one, which is the time to live, which pretty much says that it has to be included after the target, and it has to be included by this time to live. That essentially means that many block heights in the future. So if I specify block A and I make my time to live 100, then it has to be after block A within the next 100 blocks. And so your question might be, why do you have these things in your cross-shard messages? And essentially, it makes it possible for us to kind of come up with more interesting fork choice atomicity definitions, or satisfy kind of more interesting fork choice atomicity definitions. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm not clear what forces, I guess, each fork on the target shard to have to receive the message.
Yeah, great question. So essentially, you can imagine that
that's not going to be part of the block structure.
Yeah. So essentially, when we get into kind of actually building fork choices, which we probably won't get to today, just for time, we don't want to take up the whole time, and also they're not finished being specified yet. But when we kind of get into fork choices, we essentially make it so the only way you can finalize your stuff is if you kind of include the proper things that you have to, because otherwise your blocks will essentially be invalid. And so essentially what it means is that if you don't see something in time, then you're going to have to go back and revert and actually end up including what you needed to include. And like orphan a bunch of your own blocks, because essentially no other shards. You'll never be able to finalize anything if you don't.
Okay, I see.
So I guess the easiest way
it's become an attack vector. So you can force other shards to revert by putting weird specs in there.
Yeah. So
there's a kind of bounded way in which you can do that. Only like the shards that are following you.
Yeah, so so the point is, like, yes, like to some degree, some of these fork choices, some shards have the ability to kind of control other shards. But essentially, the point here is that we can definitely still make that expensive, right? So it's like, there's not the worst thing in the world. it's bad, and it would suck if shards started manipulating each other. But it's like, we can kind of bound the damage that they can do and also punish people if they're damaging each other. So it's not so bad.
Yeah, we can definitely. I mean, just because it's possible in the distributed system doesn't mean that it's profitable for the miners to do.
Yeah, cool. So the next thing, so this is our sent list. The next thing is our received list. It's essentially the exact equivalent, the inverse of our kind of sent list. And so if someone's sending to you, when you receive it, you just kind of keep a list of all the things that you've gotten. Notably, you do keep queue, you do keep the target block, which notably now is on your chain, right? You kind of receive this whole payload. And then you also keep the time to live. And so pretty much the idea here is that if you receive a message, you should check that this block, this target, the thing it was trying to send to, is actually in your chain within the last time to live blocks, right? And that's kind of one of our validity conditions, namely like this one or something. And so pretty much it means like, if you are receiving something, you better have received it at the appropriate time as a block validity condition. Cool. And then this last one is the source block. And so pretty much for each shard, we kind of keep track of the blocks we actually received things from. So this tag is where things are being sent to. And this thing is like, you kind of keep track of where things are being sent from. And that way you can kind of do some checks. It turns out we kind of need to keep track of where things are being sent from for some validity conditions. So I'm not going to go through all of these things, but I'll send this document over today. They're fairly reasonable validity conditions, like pretty much things like, you can't send and receive to yourself, or, you have to, when you target something on a shard, it actually has to be on that shard, and kind of stuff from there. They're not so bad. The fork choices aren't fully specified yet.
Are you sure you don't want to just go over the conditions one by one and name them? Like, we got 2 of them down. The third one is not so bad. The
sure.
List.
Yeah.
So first 2 you got already.
Yeah. So right. So first 2 we got already. Let me just say them real quickly. You can't send and receive to yourself. If you're sending to a shard, you have to give a target block that is actually on that shard. And if you're receiving, same thing for sources pretty much. The next thing we say is that your send and receive lists can only grow. If your blocks go forward, then you kind of can't. You can only kind of delete things from your send and receive list if you kind of revert your own blocks. You fork back. The next thing says that the targets are monotonic. So it pretty much means if you send one transaction and then you send another transaction, they all kind of have to be in the same blockchain. And kind of one increasing blockchain. Otherwise, you could imagine you send 2 transactions, one that points to one fork and then one that points to another fork. Now, Greg, your attack definitely is a weird concern, right? Because you can definitely screw them forever, right? And so this is like kind of one of the ways we kind of mitigate that. The next thing says that
sources are monotonic.
Yeah, sources are monotonic.
And they agree with it. And they agree with the targets.
Yeah. So pretty much it says that this block is also monotonic, and it's consistent with all the things you've kind of sent to that shard. And so, similar to the one above. The next one says that you have to receive everything from the source.
Everything that you've received has to be from the source.
Yeah.
You don't have to receive everything from the source, but everything that you have received has to be in this.
The next one says that for everything that you've received, the thing that it sent to, so its target block, has to be in your previous kind of time to live blocks. And so, or this is like, so essentially this is saying if it sends to you with a target.
I think there's a bug here. It should have been new received.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It essentially says for everything that you received that's new, it has to be within the past TTL blocks. And this is essentially the validity condition that, like, for a message to be received, it has to be in this blockchain before this many things. That's essentially where we check it. And then the last thing says that this is kind of a weird one, but it essentially says that it makes it so you can't have overlapping targets and TTLs.
Oh yeah.
Non-overlap.
This is the trickiest one.
Yeah.
It forces you to receive by the TTL the sent messages from the shards that are representing your target blocks. So if I'm sending a message to a shard and and there's like a target block associated with that sent, and there's messages that shard is sending to me in that target block, and those for the messages for which the time to live is expired, I have to include those. I mean, they have to be included. Otherwise, that's you're kind of sending to a shard without receiving.
Yeah. So
I think we may want to have an additional condition like that last one, but for the source also.
Interesting. Greg, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that if we have protocol states as process expressions, then I'm looking at these formulae and I think a good 80% of them I can just off the top of my head turn into behavioral type formulae, where again I'm encoding the entire blockchain or the block DAG as a giant process expression. So I think time to live. I think most of this
do you think that if we could write down a program that produced all possible block structures, that's basic? Is that a good intuitive way for me to think about?
So think of it as so think of it as a spec for a process definition that and remember the process definition is composed of process definitions, right? So it's a spec for a process definition that is the entire block DAG, and that block DAG is built out of specs for a particular shard, and so on. So it's very similar to the talk I gave in Boulder, right? But now I'm articulating the logic to capture these conditions. So this is nice. This is good advancement. I can now go and test my spec against these sort of more articulated conditions.
Cool.
Yeah.
I would say that definitely most of the work was in setting up this block structure, and then the fork choice rules are kind of less of the work, but still interesting.
You kind of bounce back and forth between the fork choice versus the structure, right? You get the structure right, and the fork choice rule writes itself.
And when we have a really hard time with the fork choice, it's usually because we don't have enough structure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get it.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll fix this up a bit and clean it up, and I'll post it kind of in the Discord today. It's definitely is very much a draft, but might be interesting to check out.
Sorry, before we move on, I didn't totally grasp what the source. Oh no, never mind. I see. So the source block is saying from this other shard there is an outgoing message that I received. Is that right?
Close. So the source block itself is for this other shard. This is the block where I've received my messages from. So it doesn't
force you to receive them. It just you just record where you got your messages from.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Cool. Thanks for listening. That's probably it for me as well.
That's cool. Do we have any updates from Michael or Kent?
I'll say very briefly that Nash started writing up that document you had asked for, Greg, about sort of pitching to validators what our chain is going to be like. And so I did a little bit of reviewing of that, and we'll probably float that by this group at some point. So that's a work in progress. It captures captures in writing some of the discussions that we've had recently about validator economics and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Vlad, it would be really good if you and Nate would give a look at that, and because it's going to be pretty much, I'm sure you're going to have a spirited discussion about this.
Yeah. Nate read it and he posted a summary, and some things already really stand out to me. And yeah, I think that's an understatement.
Yes, but we need to collect those the responses, and we want that to sort of feed into the validator focus group, which is next week. And so that's part of.
Wait a second. But we have the economics calls on Friday, right?
No, we wanted to move those, and I wanted to have them a bit more frequently. The reason the time slot on Friday doesn't work because for Georgios, it's just like a really bad time.
Okay.
It's like 4 a.m. for him, something, right? So I'm trying to find a better time.
It was like midnight, but yeah. Okay.
Oh, if it's midnight, well, maybe it's okay.
But it's Friday.
Midnight.
It's Friday night.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the best time in the world.
No. Okay. Well, I would be happy to move them, but I think that like we need a dedicated call to talk about these things. Writing.
We need more than that because we've got Node 6. We've got Node 6 planning to complete, right? And this has to go into that. Meta, am I right? Is this Node 6 planning complete is dependent upon this?
That's right.
That's
right.
Yeah. So we need like a little bit more focus than just that.
Then just calls, you mean?
Than just weekly calls. Yeah, we actually have to.
Sure. So I mean,
we gotta have it out.
Twice
If
a week
there's a slot,
is pretty reasonable.
Is there a time slot that works for everyone?
So like, what's Georgios's best working time? Is he a morning guy, afternoon guy, evening guy?
I mean, he's on Singapore time, and I think you just assume that he is working 9 to 5 and is, reasonably free during non-work hours.
Okay.
Which I guess doesn't necessarily include Friday at midnight, although it might, maybe like a fraction of the time.
Yeah, sure. Okay. All right, well,
so, but I think we could set up a Telegram channel and coordinate.
Okay.
I don't think scheduling a conversation, shouldn't be the biggest barrier.
Okay. All right. Well, let's.
In terms of writing, I mean, we can totally respond to the proposal that you guys have, but that's kind of not the way we normally do research. We normally start from like basic problems, and
I get that, but we're sort of timelines are timelines. So whatever you've got to help make this the highest quality offering would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am interested in helping.
Sweet. Okay, so maybe is there a time like Wednesday morning at 8? What time is that? So for Georgios, that's like
I have a 7:30. I have a 7:30.
It's almost 11 p.m. in Singapore
on Wednesday.
on Wednesday. 8 a.m. Right?
8 a.m. Pacific time is
It's
11?
nearly 11 p.m. in Singapore, right? Because it's 10:45
Yeah, it's 11
in Singapore,
exactly
right?
11 p.m.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. So it's 4 in the morning on Saturday morning at the midnight time. I mean the noon time. Okay.
Oh yeah. Somehow I was thinking noon PST as opposed to EST
Yeah.
as opposed to PST.
I mean,
Okay.
someone's getting wrecked on 15-hour time conversions, right? Like, right?
Yeah,
Like someone just gotta concede. Or get on a flight to Seattle.
The 7 a.m. slot actually is the slot that works for everyone and all, because like 7 a.m. is 10 p.m., which is like doable.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what about 7 a.m. on Wednesday?
I have 7:30, but I could probably move it to 8. I mean, like if 7 a.m. on Thursday doesn't work, I'm happy to do 7 a.m. on Wednesday.
Okay, I could do 7 a.m. on Thursday. We need to pull this in. We need more time on this.
Okay, how about we see when Georgios is available.
Okay, I mean, I guess the other thing is we could just fly him out here.
Yeah, he's going to be in the Bay Area in mid-August. I happen to know. So, that's in a couple of weeks.
That's
maybe
late for us.
Yeah, maybe you can convince him to come earlier. I don't know.
Okay, all right, I'll talk. Yeah, I'll talk to him then. Yeah, sounds good. All right, I'll take it. So unless without further scheduling stuff, can we just assume 7 a.m. on Wednesday, and then possibly again 7 a.m. on Thursday?
That's normally fine for me. I'm out of the office at that time this particular Wednesday, but would happily join the Thursday.
Okay, cool. All right.
So 7 a.m. on Thursday?
You're out of the office at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, Michael?
He's in Eastern time.
I'm EST, so that's actually 9 a.m.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay,
I'm normally in the office at that time, but
okay, got it.
I have a dentist appointment, so.
Yeah. I thought you were.
Meta, I'm hoping to do 2 meetings, Wednesday and Thursday. So Michael can join the Thursday.
Okay. If Georgios is amenable to starting his day a little earlier, you can also do an afternoon meeting around 4 o'clock, right? I think 4 p.m. is probably like 7 a.m. for him.
Okay, that might be.
I may be wrong.
So what is
there,
that?
but I think.
No, that's right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Or even like 5 p.m. or something. I don't know, depending on what
that would make it a little late for Michael Birch, but it wouldn't be as late. It would be like 8 p.m. for Michael Birch if we did a 5 o'clock.
But if we did 4 p.m. What time is that for you, Vlad? Are you?
I'm 7 p.m. for me this week. So that's fine.
Okay. All right. So maybe then Wednesday is 4 p.m. Thursday is also 4 p.m.
4 p.m. Pacific, right?
Yeah, 4 p.m.
That's
Pacific.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So let's going once, going twice, sold. All right. Kent, did you have any updates?
No, I was going to say that I didn't really have anything Casper research related. I've been working on
you and I talked a little bit about the multiplayer and game, right?
Yeah, I guess I would, a summary would be something like I explained what sort of Vlad has been working on to you, and then you gave a process-oriented look at it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, I'm quite interested in looking at these equilibria for these games and from a stochastic process algebraic perspective. Part of this would then be if we have the equivalent of a Hennessy-Milner style logic, but for stochastic processes, then we should be able to characterize these equilibria in terms of Hennessy-Milner style formulae. So it gets us out of the function-oriented view and into a more process-oriented view with an eye to specifications that characterize the equilibria.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
But why stochastic?
Oh, because that's how you get equilibria, right? I mean, it's think about it as
Nash equilibriums aren't defined stochastically.
Understood. But what we want is we want to look at kind of rates. So stochastic gives you rates of interactions. How do I explain this? Think about each channel as giving you a speed or rate of interaction. And then you really can talk about actual honest to God equilibria, where like you can model chemistry. You can model things like the formation of salt or oxidation, things like that. That's what the stochastic stuff gives you. So in the case of like these iterated games,
but that stuff sounds. I see that there's a notion of equilibrium there also, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so what I'm doing is I'm relating the two notions of equilibria.
But you can sort of wash out the stochasticity in a lot of situations by having like a mean field model, right? It just depends on how I guess fine-grained you need your model to be.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That is exactly the idea. But the point is that we can talk about equilibria logically and rather than functionally.
Right? Yeah, but that makes sense to me also in a deterministic context.
Oh, well, determinism is not the same as stochastic, right?
Right. Yeah. I meant non-stochastic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can do it that way too. Yeah. I'm just giving the full picture. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that was kind of building on Kent's update.
Sounds interesting.
Anything else? Or can we yield back 5 minutes?
I'm happy to yield.
Yay. All right. Well, I guess I'll see Kent and Michael and Meta over in the dev stand-up in just a few minutes.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Ciao, guys.
Chat Wednesday.